Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something I'm absolutely super excited about, the immense instructional power of H5P Interactive Timelines right inside Moodle. We're going to look at how they can take a really complex evolution of ideas or events and make it perfectly crystal clear for your learners. So let me ask you this. Have you ever tried teaching the history of a subject, or maybe the milestones of a massive project, or even the evolution of a complex idea using nothing but a giant, never-ending page of text? Yeah, just imagine the struggle. Your learners are basically getting lost in this huge sea of paragraphs, trying desperately to figure out what happened first, what changed next, and how the whole shebang actually connects together. It's tough. To fix that, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The instructional challenge. 2. When to use timelines. 3. Building them in Moodle. 4. Events, eras, and media. And 5. Designing for progression. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The instructional challenge. I absolutely love this concept. A timeline isn't about time. It's about showing progression. You know, some topics, they aren't difficult because they're inherently complicated. They're difficult simply because learners need to see how something changed over time, step by step. Without actually seeing that progression, the whole story just gets lost. All right, Section 2, when to use timelines. Now, most people instantly associate timelines with standard history classes, right? But think outside the box for a second. We're talking medical treatments, construction phases, product roadmaps, employee onboarding journeys, legal processes, and even customer life cycles. The common thread here, the learner needs to understand how something changed. Timelines are absolutely perfect for literally any scenario where chronology and evolution truly matter. It really all comes down to choosing the right tool for the job. Your best uses are things like history, product evolution, and project milestones. Basically, anytime showing progression is your main learning objective. But poor uses? Well, if you're trying to teach a static procedure, present random disconnected facts, or run assessments, definitely don't use a timeline. If that's your goal, another H5P content type, like maybe an interactive book, an accordion, or a quiz, is going to serve your learners a whole lot better. Okay, moving on to Section 3, building in Moodle. Getting started is actually super straightforward. You just add a new H5P activity inside Moodle, select Timeline from the drop-down menu, and give it a clear title. But then, and don't skip this, comes an incredibly important step, creating the introduction slide. By adding a quick heading, some intro text, and maybe a nice background image, you give your learners immediate context. It tells them exactly what they're about to explore and why it matters, way before they even click next. Which brings us to Section 4, events, eras, and media. So every single event on your timeline represents a crucial milestone in the story you're trying to tell. And for each one, you'll need to plug in 4 specific pieces of information. You need a date, a snappy headline, some descriptive text, and then you have optional media, stuff like images, YouTube or Vimeo videos, or even Google Maps integrations. Providing these 4 elements creates this really rich, meaningful milestone for your learner. Quick pro tip here. If your timeline happens to cover historical dates before the Common Era, you literally just use negative numbers. So 234 BC, that just becomes negative 234. Years in the Common Era, well, they just use your standard positive numbers. Easy peasy. But wait, what if your timeline covers a massive, sprawling span of time? Well, that is exactly where eras come in. An era is this super powerful H5P feature that basically chunks a long timeline into larger, recognizable time periods. So instead of your learners staring at dozens of random, unrelated dates, they immediately recognize the larger phases in the story. It makes complex timelines so much easier to navigate and digest. Now, a quick heads up on adding media, specifically images. There is a really crucial technical requirement you gotta remember. You absolutely must use direct image URLs. You can't just use uploaded files or standard web page links. Nope. Linking directly to the image file itself is literally the only way to ensure it actually displays correctly inside the H5P timeline player. So definitely keep an eye on that. All right, final stretch. Section 5, designing for progression. This right here is probably the absolute strongest instructional principle for timelines. Think about what happened versus what changed. So if you say 2015, company founded, yeah, it's a fact, but it's totally static. But if you frame it as 2015, company launches its first LMS platform, now we're talking. Always design your milestones to show actual progress and change, not just random occurrences. Every single event should answer the fundamental question, what actually changed? To keep that story flowing perfectly, let's hit some rapid-fire design best practices. First, keep your event titles short and sweet. Second, please don't crowd the timeline with dozens of tiny, insignificant events. Just focus on the major milestones that actually move the story forward. Third, use consistent image styles throughout so it looks visually harmonious. And lastly, and I can't stress this enough, keep your descriptions concise. Concise text makes sure learners are actually spending their time actively exploring the timeline, rather than just passively sitting there reading giant paragraphs. Okay, so before you go ahead and hit publish, you've got to do some final checks. Always test the timeline from the learner's perspective. Verify that your dates are in the exact right order. Test your media to make sure it's loading properly. Double check that you used those direct image URLs we talked about, and ensure your H5P libraries are fully updated in Moodle, especially if the content type isn't showing up. Trust me, catching these little issues beforehand completely guarantees a smooth experience for your learners. So that brings us to a final thought. As you sit down and think about your own Moodle courses, is there a story your learners really need to follow, rather than just simply memorize? Because if your learners need to understand how something evolved and changed over time, an interactive timeline is going to communicate that story so much better than a traditional page of text ever could. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, happy creating!